So what would it take to recreate Emperor's song Ensorcelled by Khaos using only modern home studio tools? Now, this isn't about making a better version, okay? That's not the point. It's about showing how much you can actually do and how much can be accomplished with just basic tools and fundamental mixing knowledge. I make these videos to prove to you over and over again that once you know what to do and how to approach your mix and how to make the right decisions, the whole world of audio production opens up to you. That's exactly what I teach in my metal mixing workshop, and it's just a fundamental core of what I try to teach in general, including my upcoming masterclass. So consider this video and any video like this or any video on my channel a repeated demonstration and proof of concept of this principle. So it's 1996. Emperor have put themselves on the map with In the Night Side Eclipse. However, like I said, it's 1996, and Emperor themselves were at a bit of a crossroads. You see, the Norwegian black metal scene at the time was starting to generate some headlines, and some things that you may or may not know about had transpired, which ultimately would negatively affect Emperor at the time. In particular, Faust and Samuth were going to be a little busy for the next couple of years and weren't going to be able to take part in any band activities. But even so, Ishahn started to have a grandeur, a bigger, more epic vision for what he wanted Emperor to be. What I always found lacking in this kind of very dense expression was that you could only go that far, because it kind of started at 10. And that was the grand idea, I think, to just make everything bigger and more out of this world as possible. Now, Faust ultimately was not going to rejoin the band, so Trym stepped in and took his place. This ended up being a great decision because Trym propelled Emperor forward, both in sound and musicality. Now, in order to bring this out of the world sound, Ishahn would start experimenting with adding orchestral elements into Emperor. He would use one of the first versions of Cubase and a Roland JV 2080 to start coming up with his initial orchestral mock-ups for Anthems of the Welkin at Dusk. I did all the keyboard orchestral things in Cubase, but just for an arrangement part, but of course had no idea how to play to a click or sync things up. When we got to the Greek Hall to record Anthems, I had everything pre-prepared. I brought my computer, and then I would listen to what I programmed, and then I had to record everything live to tape. It was just like a reference. But of course you hear 10% of what I put in there because there's only so much room. Anthems to the Welkin at Dusk marked a huge evolution for Emperor. Far more ambitious, grander, and more sophisticated. And as such, this album has been held in high regard since the day it was released. So how in the absolute hell would we even get started trying to recreate this album? Well, as usual, it starts with the drums. Now, in order to do that, I opted to use the Metal Foundry SDX from Superior Drummer 3. Now, I know it's a little bit old, but there's a few reasons why I picked this one in particular. First being the amount of cymbals we have to use, but not just the amount of cymbals we need to use. Trym uses Sabian cymbals, and the Metal Foundry pretty much is an entire arsenal of Sabian cymbals. Getting the cymbal sound correct is very important. It helps recreate the overall tonal vision of the drums. Second thing that was really important was Trym uses Premier drums. Now, I'm not aware of a library in SDX that has just only Premier shells, but with EQ you can get things pretty close. The main thing was getting the kick drum sound, and I spent days working on this drum sound, in particular doing research to try to find the exact damn sample that Trym was using. Because in interviews, he says he uses a rolling module. Well, this was 1996. There were 2 rolling modules available at the time. He's using one of the 2. I'm not sure which one. But what I did, I was able to find a rolling module, TD20 online, which all the samples were available that I purchased. And I basically went one by one through all the kick samples until I found the one that I thought was pretty damn close. Plopping it in here, creating a stack, and doing a little bit of EQ and pitch shifting, this is the drum sound that I came up with. Now, the last thing that I did in order to make this recreation is I went to Trym's YouTube channel. There's a playthrough video of him playing the song, and yep, I had Trym right here on this side of the monitor and Cubase open on this side of the monitor, and I recreated Trym's exact performance in drum MIDI. It took almost an entire evening to do just 1 minute and 30 seconds of the song, but I think it was entirely worth it. and you'll hear that in just a few moments. By the way, I have made this preset available on my website. It is called the Welkin kit, and you can get it right now on the website. Now moving forward to the guitars, this was the easiest part because it just so happens that I pretty much already created the guitar tone with one of the preset packs that I created earlier on my website. This is the legendary Black Metal Tones preset pack, and it has literally a Anthems at the Welkin at Dusk inspired guitar tone called Ye Are Entranced, and it sounds like this. This is obviously for Archetype Nali X, and this is just put on all 4 of the different rhythm guitar tracks here. It's all exactly the same. And I get a little bit of processing here, which I can talk about. So all 4 of the guitar tracks go into the rhythm guitars group. As you can see here, I have basic filtering. I did my secret guitar EQ trick there. And then I've done a couple of very simple EQ moves just to clean up the guitar a little tiny bit. It's not a lot. So if you didn't want to do any EQ, for example, the guitar tone would sound like this. Cleaning up the guitar would sound like this. So as you can hear, just taking away some of the honks, some of the resonance there, not a lot of work at all. The preset itself sounds awesome. And like I say, it's the legendary Black Metal Tones preset pack. Links to all of this down below in the description. All right, when it comes to bass, we actually have real bass on this. Dominic, my very good friend, who actually really wanted to do this song, he also did the vocals for this. We'll go for that in a second. He actually bought new bass strings just to record this song. So we just get a straight DI file. It sounds like this. All right, so that's a DI file you can expect to get from a pretty cheap $200 bass, but at least it has new strings. So we have that going for it. So what I opted to do is a somewhat modern type of tone, but it's not like a super clanky, ultra distorted modern tone. There's a preset that I really like to use with Parallax called Grit. It's by Dave Attero. It's right here, just Grit. And I generally will start with this preset quite often, basically because it's not overly distorted, it's not overly processed, it just adds a little bit of grit as the preset calls. So this is what it sounds like. So we have the compression cranked on the low end there. We have a little bit of scooping here and just a little bit of high-end distortion to add some energy into the bass. That's exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to do anything crazy or make it ridiculous. So we started with the grit sound, and then we started doing EQ. Now, when you start EQing real bass guitar, you're going to find out that you're probably going to have to do a lot more work than what you're normally used to doing if you're using a bass library. So I have 2 stages of EQ. Actually, the first stage sounds like this. Really starting to clean up all that boxiness and the muddiness and the woodiness of the bass. That's still not enough yet. So I have a second stage of EQ that sounds like this. There we go. Now we're starting to get more of that bass sound that we would be used to hearing, which would pretty much be like a starting point where most bass libraries are. A lot of this, we're cleaning out a lot of the woodiness, the low mids, just the stuff that's going to get in the way, especially with the snare drum. We want to get that shit out of there from the bass and just make sure that the bass is doing low end stuff and getting out of the way of the mid range and getting out of the way of the snare drum. It's very important. If you have too much energy here in your bass guitar, you're going to have a muddy mix, all right? Then we go right into compression. Basic compression settings here. Super fast attack to clamp onto the transient of the bass right away with the longest release possible because I always want this thing compressing. I don't want the bass to be... I want to try and keep this thing as even and level as possible. A lot of that goes into having a very good even performance. Dom did a pretty good job with that. So the compressor is just trying to even this thing out as much as possible. So you see we're evening out a lot more. We're not getting these all these jumps and stuff like that, which is going to make the mix sound like uneven in the low end. Finally, we have a limiter here. By the way, these are all stock plugins in Cubase. I'm not using any third plugins for any of this mixing. The limiter is doing limiter stuff, so I'm cranking the input and reducing the output, which I did with the mix playing. Pretty much brought it back to where the original volume was. So that's all I did on the bass. It's not a lot of work. It's very basic processing, but this is exactly what you need to know how to do to make a really good bass sound. So when we put the bass in with the drums, we get something like this. So it's already starting to mesh together. We put the drums, bass, guitars together, we get this. Starting to sound pretty damn good, all right? Now, obviously, we have to talk about vocals here. So vocals, again, done by my good friend Dominic. Again, he recorded the bass and the vocals. And Dominic is really good at this style of vocal. And plus, he really knows his Emperor stuff because he's a big Emperor fan. So the vocals pretty much were one of the easiest parts of this recreation because Dom did such a good job. So the initial performance sounds like this. Sounds pretty damn sick. So there's not a lot of work to do at all. The first stage here is EQ filtering and then just thinning out the low end of the vocal a little bit. This stuff needs to be thinned out constantly and often because once you start compressing this, all this information will be compounded. And once again, the hardest thing in a metal mix is to control the mid-range. You need to get the mid-range under control so it's not too boomy and not going all over the place. Because again, too much mid-range, especially in metal and high tempos, muddy mix. You won't hear shit and you'll just be pulling your hair out trying to understand why you can't hear anything. Why it sounds loud, but you can't hear anything, right? So after this stage of EQ, we do compression, and it's the same thing, all right? Really fast attack, generally 0.5 milliseconds to grab the transients of the vocal. Decently fast release, 4:1 ratio. Again, we're just trying to level out the performance as much as possible. I do want to say that because Dom's performance is already pretty consistent, the compression does not have to do a lot of work, okay? So you could almost use any kind of compression setting here and it would work and you would look like a genius. But you really want to set the compression settings here to even out the performance. Try to get all the words to sound the same. So we get this result after the compressor. It's very minimal amount of work, like I said, because Dom's vocals were already very good. And then we're pushing it through a compressor just to catch the high sibilance of Dom's voice with some words. Very minimal. Again, all stock plugins here, not doing anything crazy. Dom did do a double, and I did the same thing on the double that I always do. It's the exact same EQ, compression, and de-esser settings, but I put a chorus on this particular track to try and put some stereo width into it, but also to make the double significantly, I shouldn't say significantly, sufficiently different so it's more of a double and it blends in together. It's not just like two tracks on top of each other. Kind of sounds goofy by itself, but when you pair them together, much more of a double effect. Sounds thicker and more stereo-esque. Now when we go to the vocals group here, we have a limiter and I put some reverb on here. The limiter is exactly what it says it's doing. I just cranked up the input and then brought down the output in the mix. And then I have the same Roomworks SE plugin here, the most basic bitch of all reverb plugins in the existence of the world. This is a 5-second reverb time with 5% mix knob, just to add some atmosphere into the vocal, but not to cover it too much. So you get a result that sounds like this. Sounds pretty damn good. Now finally we come to the orchestral parts. Now there are more orchestral elements that I did not fully recreate in the back half of the song. It's just too much work for me to do in a span of 2 days, okay? But what I did do is we did touch the string parts in the first part of the song. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned that Ishahn was using one of those Roland's JB2080s to do all the mock-ups. I'm not sure what was actually used on the album. It could have been the Roland JB2080. Now there are Roland JB 1080 plugins, but you have to join the Roland Cloud and you have to rent it like Netflix, which I'm not going to do that. So what I opted to do is I'm using the Korg Triton VST plugin here. It's not the same exact sound, okay? I'll just tell you straight up. But it's a Korg Triton, and it will have those retro 90s vibes to it. So the strings themselves sound like this. So I'm using stereo strings too. You can hear it's got more of that synthy 90s, retro type style of vibe. It's not 100% realistic sounding, but it still sounds really, really cool. And in terms of processing this, I just did basic EQ and compression once again. So the original sound sounds like this. So the EQ is just digging out some of the low egg mud, thinning it out a little bit because we want to make sure the mid-range is taken care of, and then adding some high end in here to help it cut through the mix. We are doing a compressor much of the same reason that we do it on vocals. There are some stacks and chords here that the strings are doing that bump up in volume and kind of poke out through the mix. When there are big chords and stacks, we kind of want to push the volume down, but when there are single lines, we want those single lines to be more apparent. So the compression is doing exactly that. Sounds like this. So you can see we're evening out the performance. So the chords and the single lines both have the same perceived amount of volume. And then we are adding a little bit more of reverb. It's the exact same reverb that I've been using throughout the mix. 5 seconds, I just have 10% reverb here instead of 5. Cool. Finally, let's have a look at the master chain. I'm doing nothing at all even remotely interesting. I just have basic EQ here with the sub cut, the low mid cut, and a Baxandal high shelf to add a bit more energy into the mix. Going straight into the maximizer. Nothing else. There's no magic secret EQ chain, or there's no 6 stereo wide, nothing. This is the basic mix using stock plugins and Cubase going into Ozone. Ozone is the only third-party plugin that I'm using for the mixing side of things. Obviously, I have the drum library and amp simulator. That's not stock stuff. But as far as creating the mix and mixing the song, it's all stock stuff going into the Ozone 11 maximizer here. So here is the result. Behold, Ensorcelled by Khaos. Again, anytime I do these videos, it always strikes me how much the magic was not in the gear used to record the music. It doesn't matter what this would have been recorded through. Ishahn's vision, his decisions, his orchestrations, his arrangements for how he created the music, that was the magical part. You probably could have recorded this on a Kmart tape recorder, and the music is so good, we still would have enjoyed it. So yes, my version might be more modern sounding, whatever the hell you want to say or argue with me in the comments, fine. But you cannot tell me that the magic of Emperor's music was because it was recorded in 1996. No, the magic of Emperor is because it's Emperor and it's Ishahn's creative vision. That's where the magic is. So if you like this breakdown, you can check out the one I did about Immortal. You can click on that one right here. And if you'd like to learn how to make your own mixes so you can skip all the magical plugin hype and the soon to be upcoming Black Friday plugin sales, check out my metal mixing workshop. All the links to that down below in the description.